probably don't have much interest
All right, I want to
in
report it, please. Yeah.
in learning about that. And the reason I feel that way is because in my view, the federal government of the United States has gone off the rails. And by that, I don't just mean all the things that we usually talk about as libertarians. That's all true too, right? The COVID regime, the imposition on our lives and lifestyles, the corruption of our economy, all of that is real. But there's another element that we don't talk about much, and that is that the federal government of the United States is on track to go out of business before the middle of this century. Without a serious financial course correction, there's going to be a collapse in, possibly sooner than 20 or 30, and certainly sooner than 40 years, just because the accumulation of debt and the fact that a lot of government policies hold back economic growth. And so it's going to make it difficult for us to grow our way out of this. Given that, I worry very much that a collapse of the federal government will tank the world economy, that it would bring down the bond market and it would bring down the market for the US dollar. And don't mishear me. It's not like a complete collapse of the federal government is something that would piss me off because it's just a great organization and we're going to miss it, right? This is not a group of people that are adding a lot of value to your life or mine or anybody else's. But I do worry that such a financial collapse would plunge the world into a fairly deep depression, and one that would last a significant period of time. And by that, I mean potentially generations. I also worry that as the federal government gets into trouble, it's more likely, based on what we see other governments around the world do when they get in financial trouble, it's more likely that it does something really profoundly stupid, even by its own standards, which is saying something, and gets us caught up in a military intervention that we just can't get out of. I worry about tripping into what we would call a World War III. And for these reasons, I believe that the Libertarian Party has an obligation, as arguably the only party that sees this shit coming. We have an obligation to do what we can to make sure that those near disasters are diverted. And there are specific things that we can do. We can stop the government from spending so much money and borrowing so much money. We can change monetary policy. We can get rid of the Federal Reserve System. At the very least, we can get rid of the discretionary monetary policy of the Fed. A libertarian-minded administration could absolutely make significant changes in foreign policy, profound and potentially permanent changes in foreign policy. These are things that I don't think a Republican politician or a Democratic politician is around the corner about to do, right? If we're waiting for a Republican politician to lead the charge back toward free markets, open competition, I just think, you'd be waiting for something that's not going to happen. And I would say the same thing about the Democratic Party. My family are mostly Democrats. They joined that party thinking it was a group of people that would stand up for your First Amendment rights, that would stand up for your civil liberties and a true sense of social liberalism. People in my family and the Democratic Party have gone in two vastly different directions. And I would say the same thing about myself and the Republican Party. I grew up a Republican in the 80s and 90s before joining the Libertarian a fiscal conservative, and you join the Republican Party because you would stand gone in two different directions. And so I think it needs to be said that it really is up to us. This is not just about the Libertarian Party being all it can be, and us having great parties and patting ourselves on the back. We have a real responsibility because we have an opportunity. We have a real responsibility to make the maximum effort possible to stop the federal government of the United States from doing some of the stupid shit that it's been doing. This is a big deal. If we do not succeed in this cycle, there's no guarantee we'll get as good an opportunity in the next cycle or the next cycle. And even if we do, there's no guarantee that we'll be able to play a major role in the next cycle either. So I think we have an obligation to get this right. This is why I'm in it, because I believe that there are a couple of things that we need to get right that we haven't gotten right in the past, and that our campaign can make a significant contribution to correcting that course. This is why we've got 20 people on the payroll already. We don't pay them much. We've only got 3 or 4 people that are really full-timers, but we are ready to make the turn toward the general election. We've got the team in place. As a lot of you know, we've recently hired Jim Turney, a former chairman of the National Committee, 3 times elected, as I recall. Jim is on board to run our campaign on the other side of Memorial Day. He came on several weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago, to get ready for the general election. I think that there's 2 big things that we need to get right that we haven't gotten so right in the past. One is to run with a lot of professionalism and a lot of credibility. And the other is that we need to run on a platform that is one that completely differentiates us from the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And that means running on a completely principled platform, one that is unapologetically principled, not just bold, right? As you all know, we're running on a platform that I call a Gold New Deal, which is to say a new relationship between us and government. I think that we need to talk about deep, deep change, getting rid of whole agencies, changing the nature of how our federal government works, getting back to what it is the framers had really intended. Getting rid of, for example, the IRS and forcing the federal government to go to states for money. Getting rid of the projection of military hegemony around the world. In my view, Americans are ready to hear that message. And they're not going to get it from anybody else. So that's one thing. And the second thing is, as I said, to run with a lot of professionalism and credibility. That means not only having the right team in place, as I believe that we do, it also means, as you've probably noticed, we work very hard at protecting our credibility. We back up everything that we say with details, with how you're going to do that, with the implications, what it means. We also lean into my personal background in public service, in public policy, in terms of professional success, in terms of my resume. Not because these things mean a great deal inside the Libertarian Party. They don't. But outside of the Libertarian Party, voters and big donors and media are going to expect a threshold of credibility to be cleared before anyone pays any attention to our ideas. And that matters. So we propose to run on a bold platform and to do so with a lot of credibility. One of the reasons why the credibility is so important is because we are running on such a platform. Let me give you an example. If you were running on a platform that included, I don't like inflation, I think inflation is naughty, I think we ought to have less inflation, I'm pretty sure you could hear a line like that from a high school kid. I don't think anyone's going to give you a hard time. No one's going to argue with you, right? On the other hand, if your platform is, we need to get rid of the Federal Reserve System, we need to end the Fed because politicians have come and gone and the system stays the same. It's the system that's the problem, that has to go, that has to fundamentally change, not just change whoever is in the White House and not merely changing the head of the Federal Reserve System. If that's your platform, you better be able to back that up. And so we believe that it is absolutely critical to have the right plans in place and to know what it is that we're talking about when we roll out these elements of our platform. Each plank is going to blow back a lot of hair. And so we better be ready to defend that. And not every campaign is able to do that. It's the thing that I believe sets our campaign apart. So that's kind of how we see the big picture at the moment. I have continued to be optimistic that this would finally be the presidential cycle in which foreign policy rises to the top and it'll drive the conversation leading to November. But every 4 years, I say the same thing, and it's never been the case. Always economic issues seem to take over. As a competitive matter, I don't mind that economic issues take over. As a professional economist, I'm happy to talk about all of the full panoply of economic issues: overspending, taxation, monetary policy, obviously, deregulating the economy so we can get better economic growth. I don't mind talking about all of that. It is indeed the easiest set of issues to talk about, bringing immediate value and benefits to the American voter. So in that sense, it's worth talking about. But I am hopeful that we will finally see a presidential general election that, at least in some part, is driven by foreign policy. We'll see whether that's true or not. What are you all thinking are going to be the hot issues? Do you have particular questions? What do you think about what I just shared about how I see this this cycle and our obligation?
Yeah, if you have any questions, just raise your hand as always, and we'll call on you.
Susan, hello. Good to see you. Thomas, good to see you.
Hi, good to see you and to hear you as well.
Thanks for being on here. And hey to Jay.
Hello, Mike. How are you?
Good to see you, buddy.
I think you knocked it out of the park with the medical debate a couple days ago.
Well, I appreciate that. If I may say so, and this might make a few heads explode on my team, I also think that Rec did a good job. I think that we made a good team getting a lot of the issues teased out. And I enjoyed working with Brittany very much.
Glad to hear that, because I felt the same way. I was pleased that it worked out. Michael did well enough, but I think you just did enough better job to there maybe we'll move a few more people. So I'm happy for you about that.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. It was a nice forum from an educational point of view. In other words, if there were people, you know, that we could get that discussion in front of, you know, some people that weren't necessarily libertarians, I would find that discussion quite educational.
I agree.
And, you know, it's funny. This is a set of issues. For those that weren't aware, this was it was called a debate, but it was really more of a discussion. It was just me and Michael Rechtenwald on medical freedom issues. It was sponsored by the Medical Freedom Caucus, which has given each Michael and I an A+ rating. At least I think that's true. I think they gave Michael an A+ rating. They at least gave him an A rating. And so they invited us on to do a discussion. I thought the questions were quite interesting. That was last night.
Right.
It's also interesting that medical freedom issues, of course, are now, we recognize, an incredibly important topic. How much do we wish it had been an important topic 4 years earlier, when arguably the Libertarian Party could have made tremendous progress if we had sufficiently embraced those issues? And how much do we wish that was an important set of issues 4 years before that, so that maybe we could have head off some of this crap that the federal government was engaged in? That's a little optimistic, but you get my point, that finally we're focusing on issues that we obviously should have been focused on a long time ago.
I think the only thing that they didn't touch in the debate was the food freedom aspect mixed in with medical, because if you don't have access to food, you can't grow your food your way, then it affects your medical outcome. I know a couple people had submitted questions on it, because I'm on the Medical Freedom Caucus, but I chose to abstain myself because I'm on your campaign. So it'd be a little.
It is an interesting set of issues. For the most part, they are local issues, but a presidential candidate can highlight some of these issues.
Well, the Amos Miller case
goes to
the Amos Miller case.
I'm sorry?
The Amos Miller case is what a lot of people were referencing, Mike. I don't know if you heard about it. It's a PA Amish thing.
Yep.
So the Fed is actually involved in that. They're using the Food and Drug Administration to fine him out of existence, basically.
Yeah.
Partnered with the state police and the state food administration, but the FDA is basically the ones, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture are the ones like
Yeah.
footing the bill for harassing him.
Yep. Yep. That is a really interesting point, and a really good example. In my view, you know, we always talk about getting rid of the CDC, lock, stock, and barrel, and the same thing about the FDA. In my view, that is the right answer. But if a bunch of fill in the blank doctors or get together and privatize the FDA, I would not have a problem with the creation of a private sector organization to clear information. It's it's the federal government being involved that is such a problem, right? Because if people in Pennsylvania were told by a private sector organization an opportunity to think about it and make up your own mind. And people who are close to their food sourcing, who in general are close to food sourcing and understand it, they understand what's relevant and what's not. Because so often, rules that don't perfectly apply to so many of the situations that we're talking about. Humans are good at risk management, and they're good at understanding the particulars of any single situation. And so often there's this ridiculous mismatch. And so when you layer on top of that the federal government's ability to use force, to impose fines, it's just a completely inappropriate role for government, in my view. I mean, if I want to, you know, buy something completely insane and put it in my pie hole, that should be up to me.
I know the LPPA.
That's a good quote right there.
That is a good quote. I know the LPPA at our convention, we issued I can't think of a resolution condemning the federal government and state's government involvement in the Amos Miller case. They're basically going after him because he has raw milk for sale to members.
Exactly.
And membership, he has disclosed that I don't pasteurize my milk. It is raw milk. I do it the way God intended. He's Amish.
And if you don't want to buy it, you don't have to buy it.
Yeah, you don't even have to be a member. It's a beautiful thing. You just not be a member. I'm a member of his farm because I like getting my meat from him. It's really good steak. Just a shout out to Amos Miller. You have to order it a couple months in advance, but you can get a half a cow for like $800. It's not bad.
No, that's not a bad price. I used to buy a half for 700, and that was like 5 years ago. So given all the inflation that we've had, I happen to know that that's a good price.
Yeah, you have to pay with cash or check, no card, but you know, it's fine. I'll drive out to Lancaster, pick up my meat. It's fine.
No, of course. You pay a part in advance and part on receipt.
Yeah, basically, when you pick it up, you can pay for the whole thing if you want.
A buddy of mine used to drive a trailer to a Missouri ranch twice a year and come back with a cow and a half or 2 cows. He built a cooler trailer. So that his entire trailer was this insulated cooler, right?
That's awesome.
And he would get, like I say, a cow and a half or 2. I can't remember whether he ever made it big enough to get a full 2 in there, but he would come back and sell me a half or a quarter once in a while until my freezer busted and made my house smell so bad I could almost not sell it.
I have a deep freeze. I keep it in the garage so I can avoid that if it ever gets tripped.
Yeah, so did I, but I was on vacation. I was actually up here in Virginia when it happened, and this was Florida.
Ooh, yeah.
So because it was in the garage, it got hot. When I came back after having been gone for 2 weeks, use your imagination.
Yeah, it was done at that point. So, and then
Well,
I know. Yeah, you had a question?
No, I
Jack?
was just gonna say, I'll just say, we have a local dairy farmer. I mean, I kind of live out in the Shire, if you will. and a fellow about a mile and a half away from me sells milk, raw milk for animals. He doesn't ask any questions. If you want to buy it for your quote animals unquote, he'll sell it to you. Perfectly healthy. He doesn't care. He knows he knows what I'm doing with it, but you can't tell him. You're not allowed to say, well, I might drink it, because he would then be in trouble. But if you say, well, this is just for my animals, he's fine. And that's
It's
just
so
we live
much
out here.
fuller with nutrition that I advise, anyone who's never tried it to take a shot at it, because once you're used to it, it's hard to go back. That's a one-way street. It's hard to go back to a pasteurized product that just doesn't have the richness, either in flavor or nutrients.
You know what kills me is the federal government doesn't say anything when a woman sells her breast milk to a bodybuilder because he thinks it creates protein and muscle, but then they harp on the farmer for selling unpasteurized milk.
I didn't realize that was true.
That
No, it's
is a
really
thing. They sell
stupid.
on
I mean, this
Facebook.
is a form of the war on drugs. It's completely stupid.
No logical explanation. I know PA delegates would be mad and they would say I'd be favoring you if I didn't ask the question. So there are some in Pennsylvania that feel that because you were a cop, that you're not qualified to be a libertarian candidate for president. Can you address the concerns?
Absolutely. For one thing, I think that you're not qualified to be a candidate for any office unless you've been there and done that in some way. I've been involved with law enforcement. I was a cop for 11 and a half years. I had a tremendous experience. I was fortunate that I was able to find a police department that had a separate vice unit and a separate traffic unit. So I personally didn't have to get involved with the stuff that I personally consider moronic, like the war on drugs, prostitution stings, that kind of bullshit was not a part of my job. I didn't have to get involved with, ticket quotas that some cities use to raise revenue. And so I got away from all of that crap. Look, being a police officer is all about doing the things that a libertarian believes the government ought to do. A cop is there to protect your property, to protect your safety and security. I should say your security, once in a while your safety. And as any cop would, I shouldn't say any cop, as most cops would tell you, you learn pretty quick. You're the last line of defense for the Constitution. Indeed, I would characterize the difference between good policing and bad policing to be a good, healthy, honest respect for the Constitution. You learn pretty quick that police officer has a tremendous amount of latitude over how any particular case might go. So I had a great experience. I was proud of my service, but I was also proud of the people with whom I worked. Most of the guys I worked with and gals that I worked with were registered Republicans,
Sure.
but they have a libertarian streak. The folks that I worked with were extremely 2A, extremely 1A, very good on the Fourth Amendment, in my personal view. Were there people there that should not have been cops? Yeah, I can think of one, maybe two, that probably shouldn't have been there out of the 100 folks that I worked with. You know who they are. It's the reason why cops don't say anything the way Republicans do, Republican politicians, like back the blue in every case, right? Cops don't say anything that dumb because you know that mistakes are made and you know that there are some individuals who just shouldn't be doing the job.
Hey, Mike,
You also learn.
I'm sorry. No,
I'll stop in a moment. I was going to say, you also learn that what Democratic politicians say, like defund the police, is not an answer either. Police reform is hard. It's necessary. And we can make specific changes to get police culture, police protocols, the management of police moving in the right direction. But you can't rely on your local politicians to do it, as much as I wish that we could. But there are specific changes that we can make. People don't want their police forces defunded. They just want crappy policing to end and be replaced with good policing.
right.
What were we going to say, Jay?
So I know you probably mentioned this, but I don't remember where you were a police officer. Florida?
In Florida, in South
Right.
Florida, in Broward County. I worked for one of the cities in Broward County.
I lived in Pinellas County for a long time. But the real question is, what drove you out of the force? Why, or what was the choice you made? Why did you leave?
I was done. Uh, I,
What's that?
I did the job from age 49 to 60. It was a second career, which is to say until 2.5 years ago. When I was running for Congress, I was a cop, and left the force just before the election. Those two things weren't really related, but it was nice to leave the force and be able to campaign full time. And I wanted to move back here to Virginia. I had been in Florida for 20 years. I wanted to retire and relocate to Virginia. So it was time. When I left the force, Nancy and I moved up here. And to be honest, 11 and a half years is a long time to be on the road. I never asked for a desk job of any sort. I was a patrol officer for absolutely the entirety of those 11 and a half years. And I think most cops will tell you that
You froze. Mike, you froze.
Mikey froze. Give him a second for his internet. I had to mute myself and tell my kid to get off the video game because he was killing my Wi-Fi.
Well, I think I like the fact Mike has leaned into the fact that he chose to be a police officer. He chose to follow his own basic principles. And when the time was right, he left. And I don't have a problem with that at all. I think it would be a mistake to say that his time as a police officer was a mistake, because I suspect it was anything but a mistake. So
Mike said he's joining back in. He said the
Yep.
router.
I don't know if you heard that or not, but maybe probably didn't.
And then Thomas, I'll ask you a question as soon as he hops back on. You follow up. I think we have to stop lumping people into a blanket as a party.
Right.
We're not all just one thing. If we were, we'd be Republicans or Dems.
I have a hard time holding the whole cop thing against them. I mean, I was a CO.
Yeah,
What's that?
corrections officer.
Oh, okay.
I
Well, to be honest, I live really close to several of Michigan's largest major high crime prisons. A lot of people I know are prison guards. I think that's it's a hard job, but I don't like the way they approach legislation, controlling the message about what they do, because there are real problems, to my mind, with the way corrections officers who are dealing with the inmates function on a daily basis. We see it here in the Ionia area.
The problem is they're out now. We would have you. My mom's been a corrections officer for 18 years. She's near retirement. She said the problem is they purposely, because of staffing, understaff the jails. So you have like 150 to 1 ratio. So when you have 150 to 1 ratio, money. It's all about money.
Okay.
Hell,
When you have
once you're
150
done,
to 1 ratio, it's hard to be perfect in your job because you have to cut corners in order to stay safe.
I mean, my experience, I worked at an SCI, State Correctional Institution.
That's what's right.
What made me quit was the lack of staffing.
Yeah.
I literally
was a great
lost the block. The what the hell? The prisoners took the block over on me. It was me against 100 plus, and no one wanted to do anything about it.
And my mom worked at Graterford. Now she's at Phoenix. Because Phoenix was built on the same
God
time.
bless her.
And she still calls it Graterford. She refuses to call it Phoenix.
I mean, Phoenix is at least modern compared to what Graterford was.
Oh yeah,
Graterford was ancient.
You would tell cell like 20 to open and cell 100 would open. They left Graterford, moved to Phoenix like they were moving inmates 24/7. Like
They did that while I was working I was at SCI Cole Township.
Okay, yeah. So you know, so when they were moving over to Phoenix, a week after they finally moved over to Phoenix, the big house collapsed in on itself, and now the cells are home to the geese.
Which
One of the
is funny
problems I have,
because they were
a lot of people like to talk about we should privatize the prisons and we can reduce the costs and it's a great public-private partnership, and I think it's a terrible idea. As bad as I think overcrowded public funded prisons are, the motivation to cut corners and not do the right thing for the sake of the profit motive in an environment that is not a business, it shouldn't be profit driven.
There's Mike.
Create some good, I think.
the one thing I didn't like was PA used to have these programs that enticed the prisoners to actually learn skills so that when they got out, they could be productive members of society instead of having the high recidivism rates. Like they had farms and all to teach people how to grow stuff, all this. Like all the food for the prisons were grown in-house. And they decided just one day to say, fuck it, we're going to use an outside contractor to feed. So the quality of the food that was being served, which isn't just to the prisoners, it's also served to all the staff, went down. And the program that could have been helping prisoners to be able to do something outside of their lives when they got out went away.
My mom can't eat the food at the jail because she has a cardiac condition.
Did they ever
Well, yeah,
give a
because it's so salty.
was there ever a reason for why they chose
Money.
to go to a expensive, maybe not outside contractor? I'm sure they were saying it wasn't more expensive, but did they justify?
They justified it saying it was money.
But then
That
you
it was
need more
cheaper to
staff.
go outside than it was to do everything inside. But they lost a great program.
Because they needed more. They would have to hire more staffing to control the inmates that were gardening and doing vegetables and learning a trade. So
Makes
the
sense.
outside contractor, they just pay them a set fee. They don't have to pay for extra staff, 401k, well, pensions, 401k, and all that, and medical. Our prison system's screwed up. Mike,
Yep.
before we lost you, Thomas Watercott asked as a follow-up.
Was I the only one that got bumped out?
Yeah, it was just you.
assumed the whole thing crashed.
No, it was just you. You froze and then you bumped out.
Oh no. I'm sorry. I have no idea why. I just assumed the whole system crashed. I figured it was your fault.
No, that's why I texted you.
Not your fault.
So he wants to know if you support ending qualified immunity, ending civil asset forfeiture, and no knock raids.
Absolutely. There's no real justification for any of those three. Look, in the case of qualified immunity, the reason we need to get rid of it is because just the fundamental notion that you should be precluded from bringing a case against an agency or an individual officer if you feel like you've been wronged, this is profoundly un-American. And it doesn't matter whether you got a great case or a crappy case, it ought to be adjudicated, right? Now, the way to do that is to have states change their laws to require individual officers to carry their own liability insurance, just like doctors carry malpractice insurance. And the beauty of the idea is that it would invite in a third-party check from the side from the private sector in the form of an insurance company, because an insurance company is not going to put up with the bullshit of the police unions that typically do a pretty good job, good in their view, do a pretty effective job of protecting officers even in cases where they shouldn't be. They shut down the communication, the disclosure of information, and being able to hold officers accountable. Whereas an insurance company is going to demand all the information that could possibly be available. So that's something that is doable, but it has to be handled on a state-by-state basis. We can enact federal legislation to get rid of qualified immunity at the federal level, but I think there'd be a lot more momentum behind it if people would start embracing the idea of malpractice insurance for cops. As far as asset forfeiture, we're probably going to need changes in state law also. Asset forfeiture is just, again, one of those things that I don't even know how to say it. It's un-American. It's, in my view, worse than just unconstitutional.
Yeah.
Anyone who has ever seen it in practice recognizes it immediately as fundamentally, just voraciously unethical. It's really a terrible thing. It's very, very abusive. It's one of those things that a lot of agencies use in the context of drug busts, prostitution stings, things like that, where an agency will effectively, they're extorting you, they're blackmailing you into releasing your car or your boat or something, because the alternative is prosecution that you don't want to go through. That happens all the time. It is not just a matter of bringing criminal cases against people. It's really extortion using the criminal justice system. And there was a third one that you were asking about, and now I don't remember.
No knock raids.
Oh, no knock raids. Yeah, no knock raids are a bad idea whose time is gone, not come. Whether you believe that no knock raids are an ethical problem, as I do, or you view no knock warrants as merely a practical matter, either way, it's a bad idea. No knock warrants are incredibly dangerous. People get hurt, people get killed all the time. Police officers, people on the other side of the door. It's rare that an agency will go to the wrong door, but as we all know, it absolutely happens. And that's one of the reasons why it's so unethical. But even when they're going to the right place, right, to put someone in such danger is, in effect, in my view, punishing someone without due process. You need to, if someone is really that dangerous, then you're going to have to put the resources into waiting to make contact with them in a safer environment. Well, I was
Get them in their car, backing out the driveway, just blocking the driveway.
well, that's exactly right. Or get them at work or something. I mean, if they're trapped in their home, then effectively you've already put them in prison. And I just think it's a violation of due process. I was a training officer for probably almost about half of the time that I was on the road. Of the 11 and a half years, probably 5 years or more. And I would always teach the youngsters that we would not even write a ticket to someone who made it to their driveway if, someone was speeding, they ran a stop sign to do something stupid in the car, right? And you follow them, you run their license plate, you figure out as much as you can before pulling someone over. If while you're doing that, that person makes it to their driveway, it's game over in my view. That's just, their lucky day, right? I don't like the idea of writing a ticket at someone's home. It's just too dangerous, for a variety of reasons that you can imagine. It's just not worth it. And no knock warrants is sort of that situation on steroids. It's just incredibly dangerous, not at all worth it as a practical matter.
Now, you had no choice. I'm sure you had to join the union because you had no choice. Did you ever have any run-ins with your union? And did you ever think about, for the sake of doing good, consider running for a union job?
I was a member of the union. You didn't legally have to. It was a good idea to do so because that's where some of the protection comes from. Remember, officers don't typically carry their own liability insurance. It's carried through the union. And so I would not advise thumbing your nose at the union if you're a law enforcement officer. Yes, I was an integral part of the union team. I shouldn't say integral, but I was an adjunct part of the union team to negotiate with the city. As you might imagine, if you're a professional economist for 25 years and then you become a cop, you're the you're the numbers guy, right? When it comes time to negotiate with the city in our case. And I went through a couple of cycles of negotiating the 3-year collective bargaining agreement. And in particular, there was in the most recent cycle, which is to say just maybe 3 years ago or so, not more than 4 years ago, it was just soon before I left. I believed that we were going to be asked by our mayor to give up a number of what some of the officers considered to be protections, right? Protection from being fired or held accountable in certain ways, all the stuff that drives us crazy as libertarians, right? And I thought this was going to be my big opportunity. I was going to be able to make the strong case that we should be giving up these protections. Now, I didn't give up sort of my ulterior motive, which is moving our police department in a better way that's going to be better in line with our community objectives and our community ethics, which is, of course, the object of the game. The way I was going to spin it was we could get more money out of this, right? Because imagine, and this is how I believe this will play out in the future. In my mind, it was going to go like this. The mayor was going to say, I need the right to fire someone just because I don't like your hair, right? I want to be more involved with hiring, with training, with holding people accountable, with who gets promoted and who doesn't, because I need all of this flexibility to make sure that our police department does as good a job as possible aligning how you do business with the underlying values of our community. That's what it is that a mayor's job should be, right? And our mayor was a very progressive person. She was very involved with the National Conference of Mayors. And so I know that she had been exposed to these ideas. So this was my anticipation, right? And the way that I thought this was going to work was the guys were going to get pissed and say, no, to hell with it. And then I was going to say, hold on. Are you really going to give up the chance to negotiate for more money, which is what you all want, what we all want, just to protect one or two guys who shouldn't be here? Right? Because that's what it comes down to. Let's be honest. And you already know who they are. Point, you and I both, these really shouldn't be working for this city. Or if they should be, it should be behind a desk. They're dangerous. They don't do the job right. You're not happy when they show up in your scene. It's for them that these protections exist in a way that they shouldn't. If we negotiate these away, we can get more money. That was going to be my big pitch, right? This is how the negotiation actually goes. The mayor's rep says, we want to give you a 2% raise. We say we want 5. They say 3. We say 4. They say 3.5. Done.
Right.
At no point did they even ask us for concessions in the collective bargaining agreement for the union contract. Not once. And it just breaks my heart that the mayor doesn't realize what an opportunity she would have for a relatively modest amount of money. Now, if I were running a city, I would say, look, you guys are starting at, $70,000 a head and you work your way up to 100, right? Whatever the numbers are. I get that. I don't want to negotiate with you anymore about 1,000 here, 2,000 there. That's a lot of crap. I'll tell you what. I'll start you at 90,000. You can work your way up to 120 now that I have your attention. But here's what I want. Instead of 100 officers, I want to go with 88. I want the right to fire you just because I'm in a bad mood. I'm going to be involved with everything I listed before: hiring, training, promoting, right? And my team gets to decide the protocols that you use to conduct your job. In other words, this is going to be a lot more like other industries, like any other job. The boss is going to get to decide, and the boss is the elected leadership, and that means the mayor and the commissioners on the council. That's the way this is going to go, and for that, I'm going to pay you more. So if you're interested in being held accountable, making a lot more money, getting promotions based on merit, in other words, like the rest of America, this is the place to work. And I would run a full page ad in the New York Times. And I would sell the hell out of this. If you consider yourself among the best and the brightest, you want a real career in law enforcement, make some serious money, but you're going to be one of 88 instead of one of 100 because I'm cutting back. This is the place for you to work. That's how I would sell that. And it's rare, very rare, that politicians understand that they have this opportunity. And it breaks my heart.
Mike, what city did you work? That was one of the questions.
Hallandale.
I was in Deerfield Beach for a little bit, so I know the area.
That's not far. Deerfield Beach is at the northern end of Broward County, and Hallandale is at the southern end of Broward County.
Had a lot of fun on that beach.
Well, it's a mixed up, town like many towns in Broward. It ran all the way from the expressway from 95 to the beach, and so you had an extraordinarily diversified community, even though it was not very large. Like I say, we only had 100 officers in the department, but it ranged all the way from extremely high crime areas, extreme violence, huge black markets in drug dealing, all the way through to the beach where you had the relatives of Russian oligarchs with billions of dollars living on the beach, and then you had a whole different set of issues to deal with regard to those people who by the way were just as violent.
Yeah. Let's see, what other questions do they want? We hit on a lot of them. Oh, there is a video circulating where they cut a 2-minute and 37-second portion of your video down to 11 seconds that a neighboring delegate in Delaware posted. That basically implies that you were okay with everyone getting the vaccine and the wearing masks. Can you please elaborate on the full length of that video? I know I have personally shared it, the full length. I know several.
Well, look, I can tell you that in my view, even those 11 I don't remember which 11 seconds, but I doubt there's an 11 seconds from any of my videos that's wrong. Yeah, you can take it out of context, but I believe it says something like, if you want to wear a mask, knock yourself out. If you want to get vaccinated, you do you. But the rest of the video will explain that the government does not have a role in coercing you to do so. That is the fundamental nature of that. It's when I was running for Congress in Florida, I ran, and this is irony, the platform that I was running on was against the mask mandates, the vaccine mandates, the coercion, the payments. I spoke at the Broward County School Board. I rallied people at the Palm Beach County School Board.
And you protested as a cop against the mask mandates at the mask mandate rally, correct?
That is exactly right. I was still a police officer running this campaign, and proud of it. And by the way, I'm not throwing my fellow officers under the bus. The cops that I worked with absolutely were on board with pushing back against the vaccine mandates, the masking mandates. And as a team, we were effectively able to nullify quite a bit of what it was the county would ask us to do, because the governor was on board with the stupid idea of shutting down certain businesses and social events and things like that. we told our bosses to pound sand. So either the elected leadership was going to have to take care of that on their own, use code enforcement if they had to. Most of that got shoved off to the sheriff's office, which is the more appropriate agency to handle that kind of crap. And they gave their political leadership a hard time too. So I was proud of them. But this whole idea that I or the other officers that I worked with were on board with any of this is not only dishonest, but it's backwards. We campaigned against it and vociferously, and I'm very proud of the congressional campaign that we ran. Everybody in Broward, everybody at the Libertarian Party of Broward County was involved in that campaign, and very proud of it.
Awesome. And I know, so Tom, we have two questions in the chat. So Thomas Watercott said, earlier you said make states pay for federal government. What do you think of the fair tax as an interim step to that goal?
I don't think it is an interim step toward that goal. This is what I worry about. I worry that, and look, I don't have a silver bullet. I don't have a way of predicting the future, okay? But it's my estimation that replacing the IRS style income tax with what we call a fair tax, or replacing it with any other program, any other type of income tax, any other type of sales tax, or replacing with any other style tax, would be a huge political lift. Huge. And I just don't think that, in my view, in my estimation, I don't think going through that huge political lift is worth the juice, as we say. It's too big a squeeze. Because what you end up with at the end of the day is still a relationship between us and the federal government that has that direct financial tie. I don't like it. This is in other words, I'm not trying to replace the personal income, the personal federal income tax with another tax that allows the federal government to abuse us. What I want is for the federal government to have to go to states to get any revenue at all. And we're not even talking about the fact that we need to cut back on how much revenue the federal government is allowed. That's a different conversation. To the extent to which the federal government is going to get any money at all, it should be forced to go to state legislatures for it. And the reason I feel that way is because state legislatures can, to a certain extent, and ought to stand up for us, should stand up for our rights, should be the organizations that represent our interests. They are in a better position to tell the government to go screw themselves. If you've ever been audited, as I have, it's very difficult for an individual to tell Washington to go pound sand, right? You know, I was lucky. I hadn't actually done anything wrong. I was able to outlast the idiots. But being audited is an unnerving process. It just is. And it exemplifies the lopsided nature of that relationship. It's not a fair one. And I believe that it's one of the reasons why the federal government feels like it can spend as much money as it wants, because it's got this unending tap on us, right? In a perfect world, we would have congressmen and senators who would stand up for us. As a practical matter, however, they typically just roll over. And so, just like in the case of police reform, you shouldn't need to go to extraordinary lengths because you should have local politicians standing up for your interests and imposing reform on your police department. We should have that with Congress in Washington, but we don't. And so, in my view, we have to implement extraordinary measures to hold back the power of the government, to decentralize that authority. And one of the ways to do that is to force the government, the federal government, to go to states. That's how I see it anyway.
The hat in hand approach.
That's exactly right. The hat in hand approach.
So Mitch asks, can you ask Mike, is our POTUS, if you are a POTUS candidate, will you share all data collected by your campaign with LP National and the individual state affiliates?
Yes,
Obviously just the data
100%.
from those
And
states.
yeah. No, I get it. And look, I'm really sorry that this has become an issue. Apparently, I'm not expert in this, but apparently there's been a campaign in the past that hasn't done that. I find that an ethical problem. And the reason I find that a problem is because I think it needs to be said that in some sense, the data don't really belong to you. You know, the reason you're in a position to collect this data is because you're representing the party. If you were not representing the party, it's not like people are going to be giving you the money and their personal information. You would not be building these relationships, right? Let's just be honest. It's not like all of a sudden with the nomination, you're Mr. Wonderful and everyone wants to give you money and wants to give you their personal information. That's not how this works. The reason they want that is because you're representing the party. It's because you have ballot access that you did not pay for. You have ballot access because you're a member of the party, because you're representing the party. That's why you get the data. So in some sense, I think it's really horrible that a campaign that this question even comes up, right? I mean, I understand why it does, because apparently there's been a campaign in the past that didn't hand over all the data. But absolutely, I feel like that data set doesn't belong just to the campaign. I hope that makes some sense.
Yes. And then did you have a question, Susan? I know you have your mic on.
What's that? Is my mic open? I'm so
Yeah, I didn't
sorry.
know if you had a question. That's all.
Oh no, sorry. I hope my power supply isn't making too much noise.
No,
I'll
you're
mute
good.
No, you
myself.
didn't make any noise at all. We just noticed that it was on, and so we added 2 and 2 and got 7.
So, and then I don't know. Does anyone else have any questions? I don't want to
Those were good questions, by the way.
I got more.
Yep.
I got more. I have two. One, they're on different issues. The first, I guess, sticking on the economic things. You're an economist and you understand how money works and how free market works. But when you're talking to 50-plus-year-old people, you want to convince that you want to eliminate Social Security, Medicare. What are your? That's a hard argument to make to people. It's an economic argument, but it's also one that must take some time to roll through. And how do you do that?
First of all, I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's not necessarily easy, but it's that important that we need to do it.
It is.
Okay. And so I think that there's 2 elements to it, in my view. One is to point out you have to sort of freeze people's minds for just a moment and say, I'm going to talk to you about why Social Security is, in my view, a really evil system, why it's poorly designed, and why we can do better by getting rid of it. But I also need to talk to you about how to do that and how to handle people that are already in the system in a way that's fair, that at the end of the day is not going to piss you off because you've already been dragged into this. And ethically, I think it needs to be said, I'm not about screwing you twice. In my view, if you're already in Social Security, you've been screwed once. I'm not trying to screw you a second time, right? What I'm trying to say is if you're already in this, you paid some money in, I would give you the option. You want to keep going with the system, which I would advise you is a bad idea. But if you want to stay in the system, you can stay in the system. Or I'll pay you out. Okay? I'll pay you out what you paid in with a little bit of interest. Maybe it's not a great deal, but to be honest, staying in the system is not a great deal. And for people that are, already taking money out, if you're already at the back end of the system, I understand. There's going to be a lot of people that don't want to take a lump sum. They're used to what they're used to. Their expectations are what their expectations are. They're going to say, no, don't touch me, right? And in that sense, you've got to keep your Obama-esque promise. When Obama said you can keep your doctor if you want to, right? You need to be able to tell people that's how this is going to work, right? If you don't want to be touched, that's fine. Now, let me tell you what I'm going to do. I consider Social Security evil. And the reason I consider it evil, and by the way, you can't be afraid to say that. This is an ethical, this is not just a mathematical problem. This is not just arithmetic. The reason I say that it's evil and unethical is that if you're bringing youngsters into a system and promising them a crappy rate of return or no return at all, just because you misdesign the system and have this huge overhang of old people, right? And you know you're going to give them a bad rate of return. That's problematic. But now you do it by force. You force people into a crappy system that you know is not in their interest because you've got a crappy system and you don't have the guts to sunset it. That's evil. That's an ethical problem. So what I think we need to do is, bam, right away, we shut down the system insofar as we're not bringing people in. You do not bring in one more young person. And so it stops right away. Because the more people you bring in, the bigger the problem gets. It's just more people you got to pay out. You got to stop it right away. For people that have already paid money in, you don't screw them twice. They've already been screwed once. You pay them out, and that's how you have to sunset it. Is it expensive? Is that way of course it is. Is it more expensive than any other way? No, of course not. There's no such thing as a free lunch. There is no cheap way to resolve Social Security, right? We trick ourselves into believing it's cheaper to force young people to pay in. That's not cheaper. It's just putting the burden on someone else. And that is an ethical problem, in my view. And I would say the same thing about Medicare. What we really need when we sunset Medicare is to stop the regulations that preclude the availability of catastrophic insurance. You should be able to buy a catastrophic plan, and that's all if you want, or no plan at all, obviously. But there are a lot of people like me, who would buy just a catastrophic plan, right? I'll take care of the first, several $1,000s. A lot of the plans that you buy these days have $7,000 deductibles anyway. They just pretend to be comprehensive programs. But I would like to buy something that just takes care of, if I'm in the hospital for more than 2 days, that's what I need covered. I've had a family member go through the, $1 million worth of treatment, literally $1 million worth of treatment. So I know the importance of having insurance, but that doesn't mean I want the government shoving it down my throat.
All right, now the other question, it's a foreign policy question, and it's not going to be as popular. Mostly everything we agree on. My father was in World War II. I'm that old, and I heard a lot of stories in the late 50s and the early 60s about Adolf Hitler. To my mind, Vladimir Putin is Adolf Hitler, or at least he wants to be, and he scares the hell out of me. As much as I'm anti-war, I don't see, to my mind, any way to walk away from Ukraine without it creating a larger. I mean, for me, I'd give Israel $0. They're a first world country. Let them solve their own problems. If they want to go fight with each other, not my problem. Not my problem. They're a first world country. But Ukraine, as corrupt as it has been over the years, is still a better governed country, more free than Russia, either than Russia is or how Russia aspires. And I'm not a domino theory guy completely, but I believe that Putin was very comfortable having a buffer zone between Russia and the West with Ukraine. There was less opportunity for information, for the happiness quotient that can come in a free market society to bleed into Russia. So I've always thought that it's really important for Putin to fix that buffer zone. So he has it in place. But I also don't think he'd necessarily stop there. And that's an opinion. I don't know what to do. Personally, I'd bring home, I've said this before, I'd bring home troops from every other freaking country. They're all 170 nations where we have troops. And I'd bring all of our soldiers home. But I would reserve some of the money that we have been spending and give it to Ukraine. Let them buy it. Now, I'm sure that a lot of people don't agree with that.
Well, Mitch, I must say that you have made as strong an argument for participating in Ukraine as I have ever heard. So good on you.
That's okay.
And you know, I'm going to disagree with you, but I'm not going to disagree with anything you said. I mean, everything you said is rational, and yeah, I mean, you're right about all of those things. The reason I end up in a different policy position, as much as I agree with the sentiments that you have expressed, is because I don't think that all of those things rise up to the level of, and therefore it's in our strategic national interest to take money from American families, including families that can least afford it in some cases, and use that to execute on that defense strategy on behalf of Ukraine. And that's not to say that anything you said is untrue. I think Putin is a dangerous guy. Whether he's Adolf Hitler or not, that might be a matter of a different debate. But
hyperbole, maybe.
Yeah, but he is a dangerous guy. He is somewhat out of control in the sense that there are not sufficient checks and balances inside of his government, right? He is out of control in the sense that the international community doesn't control him. His economy doesn't seem to hold him back. He has access to petrodollars, all that he needs. And I also worry about sort of the end of life phase of decision making that this guy is going through. You know, thinking about legacy, thinking about how future Russians will view him, thinking, you know, he is a big student of Russian history. He's thinking, you know, how do I hearken back to the good old days of very, very powerful Russian leaders who cast a huge shadow across Europe and indeed the entirety of the world. He's thinking about all of this stuff. And I appreciate the extent to which the United States government in some ways forced his hand by pushing for eventual NATO membership in Ukraine, and how we also contributed to the vulnerability of Ukraine by negotiating away their own control over nuclear weapons. Yeah, yep. All of this is true. I don't believe that there is likely falling dominoes after Ukraine. And the reason I feel this way, and I make no guarantees, okay? You and I can have this conversation in 10 years and 20 years, and we'll look back and we'll either have a chuckle at your expense, my expense, or even more likely, both of us, because, you know, history is very difficult to predict. But I do not believe it likely that there will be other falling dominoes, because first of all, taking over Ukraine has proven to be more difficult than he anticipated. And difficult even by the standards of the Russian army eventually being able to do it. He's had to call up extra troops, dedicate much more in terms of resources than he anticipated. He's had to give up more political capital, both with his oligarchs, with his people whose opinions he largely controls, at least what feeds their opinions, and certainly internationally, about which he also doesn't care too much. But it has been much more costly than anticipated. That's number one. Number two, everything you said about Ukraine is true, but I don't think it's as true about other neighboring nations. I worry about Estonia. You know, I worry about Estonia. I'll be honest with you. To a certain extent, I worry about Latvia as well. But Estonia is the one that I worry about. Yeah, very much. But I don't think it presents the same opportunity as Ukraine, in the sense that it really would trigger a larger response from the Western European nations. And I don't think it's as interesting and valuable strategically to Putin, nor do I think that there's the same history there that compels him to reincorporate Estonia in some sense into the Russian Empire. So I I think it's unlikely, no guarantees, but I think it's unlikely that there will be other dominoes that fall. The other thing that needs to be said, I think, is that we need to see what our European allies in Western Europe are likely to do in our absence from NATO. I would prefer that we send the signal to the other NATO members that, as I often say, whatever was your plan B is now your plan A, because the United States is not going to be your plan A. I believe that this would compel European nations to think real hard about their strategies and about their defense interests. If they decide, as I am presuming some will, that they need to spend more on defense than they otherwise would if the United States pulled back from defending Europe on their behalf, right? So some are going to go from 1.5% of GDP spent on defense to 2.5%, for example. That is going to create a fairly intimidating bulwark against Russian excursion. How that plays out, I can't predict, but it does mean that the Europeans are going to have a lot more latitude in how they respond to Russia if they're not underfunded, and if they're not constantly looking over their shoulder at the United States, who is always telling them to shut the hell up because we don't want to be dragged into a war. Poland being the primary example. And so for these reasons, I believe that there are steps that we can take to contain Putin. But I certainly don't disagree with you that it's a dangerous situation and a dangerous character. That is obviously true. We'll see. You know what's going to be interesting?
You don't have a simple solution, do you? Because there isn't one. So I said, so you just don't have a simple solution, do you? Because there isn't one, I guess.
No, you don't have a simple solution. I think you need to negotiate your way out of Ukraine lickety split. I wish that we had never gotten into it, but I think that you can bring that to a close relatively quickly by bringing pressure on both sides. And I wouldn't even bother with negotiation, except that I feel like we contributed to the situation getting out of hand and getting as far as it has. So I think that we have some ethical obligation to at least participate in negotiating our way out of it. TJ, I know that we burned up a lot of time. I'm really grateful that everyone's been so flexible. But if there's like one more question, I'm open to it. Absolutely.
I think we're going to ask Reckon all the same questions, so might as well ask you, what will your promotion, after you get the nod, what would your promotion game plan be, and how would you expand the libertarian message to bring more libertarians into the party?
Yeah. This is actually the major point of differentiation between me and Michael's campaign. I like Michael very much, and I have told this to his face. So I'm not saying anything behind his back. I hate his strategy. Hate it. In fact, I hate it so much, I wish I were in charge of his campaign, because I actually like Michael much more than his campaign and his strategy. I think that Michael is a very smart guy who's a tremendous writer, and I think he does well with the media. I think Michael Rechtenwald is an asset that should be used better. That is just the truth. That's how I feel. I think his campaign strategy sucks, and I can speak to that. But let me speak about our own campaign strategy first. And that is that, and we opened up with this to a certain extent. Two things that we need to do powerfully and slightly differently, quite a bit differently than our national campaigns have in the past. You have to run in a very differentiated message, and you have to run with a tremendous amount of credibility, which means leaning very hard into my own personal background in public service and public policy. As a tactical matter, and this may be where the question is really going, you don't say anything that a Republican might say or a Democrat might be saying. If I say something that you might hear from someone else, I got no reason to say it, right? There's no reason to say inflation is naughty and I don't like inflation. You've got to be out there hammering the issue in a way that differentiates. And for this, you need to run on that very principled platform. This will be especially true in terms of foreign policy, where we need to make the case for getting out of the Israeli conflict based on principle, not because we have some weird affection for one side or the other. We need to come right out of the box in June, not July, August, September, October, spending a lot of money, spending a lot of borrowed money. We need to send a signal to the American public. There's a new sheriff in town, a new choice. We are not the Republican Party. We're not the Democratic Party. Our values better align with Americans than do whatever the hell it is the Republican Party is running on or the Democratic Party is running on. That's the truth. And so we can very credibly say, stop wasting your vote. If you are voting on something other than your ethics, you are wasting your vote. When you vote for a Republican, you are sending the signal to that party that you think that everything that they are doing is terrific. That's just the truth. That's just a practical matter. Same thing if you vote for a Democrat. You're telling that party you're on the right track. So you think about that. Is that the signal that you want to send? Really? Is that the signal that you want to send? It is for this reason that we are going to be running a campaign to win. Now, I'm not here on this town hall to say something stupid about what I think my chances are. Don't mishear me. Do not intentionally mishear me. We are going to be running to win because that is the right strategy. If you hold up your hand and you say, I can't win, you are no longer participating in the general election. No reason for anyone to pay any attention to you. This is not a philosophy seminar. This is a competition. No. Or yesterday, if you're you can do it in 2025, you can do it in 2026. You do not need to use the general election, use our ballot access. You do not need to use a campaign or a candidate to do that. The reason we have a campaign and a candidate, the reason we have ballot access, the reason we work so hard at achieving ballot access is to participate in this competition. That's what this is all about. The only reason anybody pays any attention is because they're curious, not about your philosophy. They're curious, who is going to be the next president of the United States? That's what they're curious about. Now, given their curiosity about the competition, they are therefore curious about your philosophy. So we need to participate in a very competitively credible sense. That's why people will pay attention to us. When people pay attention to you, you can get your ideas out. This is the way to brand our party. You do not brand your party by standing down and saying, I can't win. You brand your party by getting people's attention and drawing that attention to your ideas. I lay at the feet of past campaigns the fact that our party has never been correctly branded. This is what undermines our ability to run local candidates. And I know firsthand, because I've run for Congress before, I can tell you, I spent hundreds of hours, not dozens of hours, hundreds of hours standing in Walmart parking lots, passing out literature and knocking on doors and talking to radio stations and these online debates. It was during COVID, so everything was online, right? I can tell you the value of the Libertarian Party brand is zero. That there are places in this country where you can get more votes as an independent than you can as a libertarian. That is messed up. That is sick. That's because our party has never been branded in the past. The way you brand the party is to get attention and direct that attention to your ideas. And the way to get attention is to compete in the general election. That's my view.
And then so
And if I were running the Rechtenwald campaign, I would say the same thing, that Michael Rechtenwald is a smart guy who could run a credible national campaign. And that team's refusal to do so pains me to no end, because I really believe that Michael is a nice asset and he's being used wrong.
And Thomas asks as a follow-up, I mean, you touched on it a bit. What's your plan to assist down ballot races, and what do you think of Lars Mapsted's Stop 270 strategy?
I hate Lars's strategy because it says two things. One, I'm going to focus on two places because I can't compete nationally. Don't mishear me. I know that's not what Lars says, right? Lars says we're going to focus nationally and we're going to focus even more on these two. I can do both. No, you cannot serve two masters strategically. The other problem is that it says that I can't compete nationally. When you say out loud, I'm going to focus on these two areas, you're effectively saying to anyone who's listening, big donors, media, voters, your competition, you're saying, I can't win. I can't get an electoral vote anywhere else. To make an impact, what I'm going to have to do is focus on these two congressional districts. I would love to get 2 electoral votes, but when you make known in advance that you're going to focus on just 2 congressional districts in the United States out of the 435, that's the wrong strategy. It sends the wrong message. And I don't believe that we should be blowing our ballot access all over the United States that we work so hard for on a focus on just 2 areas. Now, another interesting point. The questioner characterized it as stopping the 270, I think you said, or something similar, right?
Yep,
The only way that two electoral votes could possibly matter is in the extraordinarily unlikely event that Biden and Trump wind up in a dead tie or are off by 1. That is simply not going to happen. Just statistically speaking, that is not going to happen. So what you're doing is you're giving a focus to your campaign that undermines your national image in order to get attention if, and only if, something extraordinary, vanishingly small probability of happening. That extraordinary thing actually happens. And this is why I don't like the strategy.
That was very well said. Yeah, he said thank you for your answers. I'm glad I'm backing you. So I actually played with the Electoral College map, and I actually take it a step further. In order to stop 270, and I did it based on RFK's just notoriety in New York with his dad running the seat. For RFK to do it, he would have to win New York, win New Hampshire, 1 Electoral College in New Hampshire, and 1 in Nebraska, and then the rest of the board would have to play out perfectly as predicted, which we all know never happens. Like, it never happens.
It's
so, like,
almost impossible.
Yeah.
Not impossible, right? But it's, yeah, good on you. It's extraordinarily difficult.
Trump would have to win Georgia, but then if he flips Michigan like he did in 16, but did it in 20, he wins. Biden would have to win all the blue states, including Nevada, Arizona, and that whole that Southwest area corridor. I mean, it's almost it's pretty close to impossible. But you'd have to win one of those big states still, like New York or a Texas, a Pennsylvania, a Georgia, or Florida.
Or
Unless
those other two guys have to wind up extraordinarily close. I understand.
yeah, like
I understand.
it's the likelihood is just not there. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. All right. What else we got?
do we have any other questions? We're going on the
You guys have been
hour
really,
and a half
really terrific. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Thomas Watercott. I just wanted to ask again about what you're doing for the down ballot races to help moving along. I'm in North Carolina, so I'm really backing Mike Ross for our governor, and I think the help from any candidate would definitely boost his chances.
Yeah, Mike is a good guy. Mike is an example of a statewide race in which I think we can make a real impact. For a statewide race like that, I think that you've got to go out of your way to make an appearance with someone like that and, you know, do some co-marketing work, especially in social media. You can do some co-marketing work, and here's where the development of lists is really going to matter. We don't want to wait to share lists until after the election, right? We can work together along the way. And in a statewide race like that, it really makes a tremendous amount of sense. There will be other down ballot examples where it makes sense to work very, very closely together in, for example, significant metropolitan areas, you know, big urban areas where there are a lot of voters with whom you can reach a tipping point. That is really important. The other areas where it can matter are those states that have extraordinarily high requirements to achieve ballot access, where, you know, we haven't had all the success that we want in the past. And in those kinds of places, you've got to spend some extra attention. And when there's a statewide candidate or candidates in important metropolitan areas, working together very closely can really matter. And I'm not even talking about the joint appearances. You can do quite literally hundreds of joint appearances all over the United States. But in addition to that, you can run co-marketing on social media. You can share lists. There's a lot of things that you can do with the right candidate. And Mike Ross is an example of that. Besides branding the party correctly, which is the big one.
This is Thomas Watercott again. Thank you very much for that. I'm currently struggling to get myself back on the ballot for the 6th U.S. congressional district here in North Carolina, but that's a different fight, and I don't know if I'll be successful or not. But right now, the 6th Congress district is running unopposed. Addison, the MAGA endorsed Republican candidate, is the only one running on the thing.
That's a good opportunity for us.
Yeah, I missed filing deadline because I was under treatment for cancer, and they required in-person filing. I'm currently in contact with North Carolina State Board of Elections to find out if there's any way to get on ballot short of litigation. But my only other recourse would be to get on as a write-in candidate, which is still doable. I've only got about a 2-month window to gather like 500 and some odd signatures, but we're working on it.
Well, good luck with that. You can get the 500 if you've got friends who can do hours in the parking lots. By the way, good luck with your treatment. I wish that I had no idea, you know, what you're talking about. I think lots and lots, you know, possibly everyone on this call has been touched in one way or another by this disease. I wish you all the best. I'll be thinking about you. I remember how difficult it was to get on the ballot in Florida when I ran for Congress. It's really an uphill climb, and I'm sorry that through this intersection of circumstances, you know, you've been on a preliminary basis cut out. That really sucks. Let me know how it goes. I don't know what I can do to to help other than raise awareness of the need for the signatures, which I'd be happy to do. By the way, you have a database of North Carolinians?
I currently don't, but Mike Ross has offered to share on a couple of occasions what they've got, and Ryan Brown, our state chair, has been very helpful with information. We're just working on it as best we can.
Yep. All right. Good luck. Good luck. I know Ryan will do right by you.
Thomas, if you need to, I'm on national candidate support, and we do have voter gravity for for all the states. North Carolina, I don't think is enrolled. I know Susan signed up for it. So I get with Susan, and then if you need further help, just email me. I'll put my email in the message, so this way you have it. But your state should have free access because of national or voter gravity. So if the state lets you use theirs, or if not, you get a discounted rate as a candidate. And I'll provide you a huge database for North Carolina.
That could be a very good idea. How's everyone else doing? We're down to the wire here. Susan and Mitch and Thomas and Jay, you guys have been terrific to hang in there with us, particularly given the length of time. If there's anything that didn't get asked, but crosses your mind, drop me an email. You guys all have my email address, I'm sure. Use mike@miketremont.com. Or drop me a text. I think my phone number is still on the website. Drop me a text or an email and let me know what's on your mind. This is how we learn. We learn from each other.
Well, this is how I'm learning more about you, which is I really appreciate the fact you're doing these a lot. So thanks.
Well, thank you. This is a lot of fun for me. We've done a town hall for Pennsylvania in the past, but I think it's really terrific and extraordinary, by the way, that you guys are doing these on your own and inviting the candidates in. It gives you a chance to, better control the dialogue and make sure everyone gets included. The other states don't do this sort of thing, so you should really be proud of yourselves. This is a good idea, and I've really enjoyed doing it.
And we are recording it, and then once Mitch gets his laptop going, it should be the next day or two. We're gonna upload them all to a YouTube channel for business, and then we do share them with all the delegates in our chats. So even though they didn't attend, because some people are working, and I think credentialing or something has a town hall. I don't know. They're doing something. Brittany's
All right, that all sounds terrific. Just edit out all that crap I said about Rechtenwald. If I said something nice, if I said too much nice about Michael, edit that out. I'm kidding. I'm a big Michael Rechtenwald fan, but
Absolutely.
all right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.